All right. So my name is Erin Yarmel, and today I'm joined with Dr. Erin Evans. So Erin is a sociologist. She did her PhD in sociology at University of California, Irvine. She was a former professor at Beloit College, and she's just about to start as an assistant professor at San Diego Mesa College. She works on social movements and institutionalization. Welcome, Erin. It's great to have you here.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I thought that we could just start by talking about something that you and I have in common. So we're both Erins. Um, and what I'm wondering is first of all, do you pronounce our names differently?
So I do not, but I know people who are extremely adamant that is pronounced distinctly different.
Yeah.
You're Erin, and I am Erin. I guess is that
I
how?
think that's right. Yeah. Yeah. I never pronounced them differently either until I moved to London for a year. And I rented this flat, and the person I was renting it from, as soon as I got there, she was like, "No, you're pronouncing your name wrong. It's not Erin, it's Aaron. Your name is Aaron. The female version is Erin." So that's when I learned that I was doing
Yeah.
this wrong all these years.
Yep,
Caused
yep.
an existential crisis, but here I'm back now.
Especially when somebody's telling you that you're pronouncing it wrong. Mine was my friend from New Bedford, New Bedford, if you will, when I
Yeah.
moved my early 20s, I think, and he said, "Erin Evans, you pronounce your name wrong, huh?"
Fantastic. Awesome. So let's just jump right in. So one of your interests is animal rights. And I'm wondering about just sort of the biographical question. How did you get interested in animal rights? Yeah, go for it.
That is a super, super intense question. And, it's always a quandary how far back to go. So I will just say that when I was 13, and most likely my mom had been planting seeds throughout my life, but when I was 13, I worked at a pet shop, and we didn't have dogs and cats, but the pet shop had a fire, and we had to deal with removing the dead animals. And I remember walking into that place and the smell and having to remove the animals just had a strong impression, to say the least. And when I saw my mom afterwards, I said, "Mom, I want to be vegetarian." She was like, "Okay." And then fast forward, because I don't want to be too long-winded, but in terms of my academic interest, I had no intention of going into academia. I was planning on just working in nonprofits, doing activism, and I fell in love with teaching. And during my master's program in political science at San Francisco State, I went back and got a master's in political science, first of all, because I was involved in an animal rights campaign that came under a lot of political scrutiny, a lot of repression, and I felt like the movement didn't adapt well to a changing political climate, and I didn't understand the political system. So I got a master's in it and fell in love with teaching, and then kind of moved on to sociology. Sociology is I would say it is. Studying social movements is more, it's a discipline that's more hospitable to studying social movements, and especially animal rights. So yeah, that's how I landed here.
Wow, that's fascinating. And so I'd love to just ask just a couple of questions, or maybe just one question about that. So first, your mother had you said it was like a veterinary clinic. Is that right? Or
No,
a pet shop.
it was. I worked at a pet shop in town.
A pet shop. Okay, yes. And you smelled the dead animals, and that led you to go vegetarian.
Dealing with the dead animals, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And so what I wonder is, how did you transition from sort of doing the personal dietary change, where we're not going to eat animals, to moving towards being interested in actually going out there and taking action?
So the academic in me wants to say that I had networks and I knew
Okay.
people involved in activism, and so that led me to do so. And I'm sure that's true in some way. What I remember was when I was 16, my first protest was at UC Berkeley against animal testing there, the lab there, and this is before, I'm pretty old, so this is before the days of social media, before all of that. And I think I learned about the protest through In Defense of Animals,
Okay.
a nonprofit out here. So yeah, I heard about the protest and went to that. And, I talk about this in some of my classes where most of us remember our first protest.
Mhm.
There's something about holding that sign that is just like empowering and kind of alters your identity to a certain extent. Like, oh, this is who I am. I hold a
Yeah.
sign. I want things. And so there's something about that protest that solidified it.
Wow, that's so powerful. I'll never forget my first protest either. I mean, it really like changes you. I think that's one thing that a lot of activists, like, they ask questions about, was this protest effective? And they
Mhm.
think a lot about how it affects the sort of passersby. But something that we don't always talk about is the way that it turns you into an activist and like makes you part of this cause by taking this kind of radical action.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think one of the things that I appreciate the most about going into this field is that I went to it with a lot of, I was pretty disenchanted with protest in general
Mm.
because it felt like, especially demonstrations, marches, and things like that. It was like, this isn't effective, this isn't doing anything. But then learning more about how people become attracted to a movement and how their commitment is solidified during those kinds of protests that in some ways are effective and effective in some ways aren't. The ways that they are effective is by bringing people in and solidifying their commitment. And I want to hear about your first protest.
My first protest. Um, let's see. My very first protest was, I think I was about like 14. And a couple of my neighbors were having this peace protest, and that we were protesting. I think we were protesting like the Iraq War, and um, yeah, I think it was that. But my memory was sort of hazy about that. And I remember I was running late, so I ran 3 miles from my house to get to this protest, and I was just covered in sweat by the time I got there. And that's one of the most salient things, just that, like, I really wanted to be there. And then when I got there, like, it was really cool. We were marching up and down the street and in Fairport, New York. And I remember we went past a bar, and the bar owner came out and he said, "Why don't you come in here and see what some of our," maybe it wasn't the owner, it was somebody associated with the bar, said, "Why don't you come in here and see what some of our patrons think of that message?" And it was a really hostile, sort of aggressive gesture. And I just remember thinking, like, why would anybody be anti-peace? Like, it just didn't make any sense to me at the time, because I wasn't really, steeped in the debate. I didn't really have a good understanding of, like, the way that polarization works and the way that issues get, like, clumped with other issues when something becomes a takeoff issue. So that was my first one. But I think the one that really galvanized me was I think it was the summer of 2017. And I was in Berkeley, and we disrupted a Whole Foods. This was with the group Direct Action Everywhere. And I mean, you can imagine, like, hundreds of activists going in and just overwhelming the store. And there it was this complete opposite, where in the Fairport, New York protests, it just felt like I felt a little bit embarrassed. I didn't quite understand what was going on. I didn't really know what the message was. And it didn't really leave me with any, greater sense of myself as an activist. But the Berkeley one was this thing where I left and I was just so fired up to do nonviolent direct action. And then I started learning about the theory, and I started reading Gene Sharp and King and Alinsky and all these people.
Mm.
So those are, I have to talk about both of them, I think, for my first protest. But
There's something about DXC it's a controversial group.
yeah,
One of the things that I oftentimes will talk about is how those kinds of controversial tactics, things like disrupting speakers, and that might be nonsensical as far as like why that disruption is happening. There's something about the young that is attracted to that kind of disruptive protest.
yeah,
It's like it's sexy and controversial. It's something that draws attention, and I wonder whether the effects of that is to again solidify commitment. Right, when you're involved in something where it feels like everyone hates me because I'm the righteous, and I think that I suspect that has a pretty strong effect on a lot of people for solidifying commitment.
yeah, I
So
think that's right. And you brought up DXC is kind of controversial. I haven't been. I should clarify for people watching this. I haven't been associated with DXC, and I was with them for just like a very short time, and I haven't been associated with them formally for a couple of years now. Um, but I'm grateful for the experience I had with them. But yeah, no, that's really powerful.